Flying? Ha! I'd just as soon come up with a plausible economic theory for Andrew Peacockers go up in a plane. It's not safe. Have you ever considered why those big buildings at airports are called terminals, huh? Have you? It's because they haven't got the guts or decency to call them God's sorting rooms, that's why. Come with me, come with me. Linguistically speaking, have you ever thought where the word fuselage comes from? Well, it comes from two French words. Fuse, meaning very bad fire, and larger, from the French verb largir, meaning to be trapped with screaming people. So fuselage means trapped in a very bad fire with screaming people. And jet, we all think jet is a nice American word, don't we? But it's not. It comes from Icelandic. It comes from Jetjavikja. Jetjavikja, Icelandic, loosely translated, means plummeting chunk of superheated metal. I mean, it's absolutely terrifying, bloody terrifying. And the worst thing of all is that much of the truth about flying hasn't been made public. I mean, the entire aeronautics industry is a farce, as this award-winning documentary shows.
Many years ago, according to legend, a young man from ancient Crete fashioned wings out of bird feathers and wax and took to the skies. Displaying all the impetuosity of youth, he flew too close to the sun. The wax on his wings melted and he plunged to his death in the Aegean Sea. That man's name was Icarus, and folklore lists him as the first human to fly. More correctly, though, he was mankind's first recorded air fatality, and a warning to those who would follow, stay out of the air. But have we heeded the warning? Hardly. Every day, more than 50,000 Australians hop on planes, blindly placing faith in a group of people who claim to know what they're doing. But do they? Amateur ornithologist Jean Skimmon is just one person who has doubts.
There are 73 million birds capable of flight.
Really?
Not to mention another 18 that can and do jump very high. Now, most of these birds live on or around flight paths or airstrips. Being attracted to things that fly, i.e. birds of a feather flock together.
I've heard that, yeah.
Birds are thus attracted to planes. Now, there are an average 12,000 flights per day around the world.
Right.
Which works out to about 6,000 birds per plane. Which means every time you get on a plane, there are 6,000 birds, each of which have your plane's name on it.
Right, yes.
The chances of a fatal collision are enormous.
Good grief, that's the most...
Look. Oh, look. Now, you see?
But are the risks of flying far greater than have ever been acknowledged? One man who thinks they are is renegade aerodynamics engineer Philip Mitlov, whose recently published book, I Wouldn't Go Up in One of Those Things If You Paid Me $1 million, has created a storm or wind shear in aviation circles.
Planes are not flying. They are falling.
Well, how can that be?
I have a diagram here, Andrew, to illustrate the principle for the layman. If we get the plane moving faster than the rotation of the Earth, it will actually fall upwards.
Upwards.
That's correct. Then, after air friction comes into play, the plane will then fall downwards.
In that case, what are the engines for?
Engines are there purely for this initial upward fall. They carry enough fuel for that, after which, of course, as you're well aware, they often fall off.
In that case, what you're suggesting is that at any given moment, there are hundreds of planes in our skies falling.
That's correct, yes.
What part do the wings play then?
Wing design, Christ. Andrew, wing design was instituted after consumer research found that people thought something was more likely to fly if it had wings.
And the tail?
Likewise with the tail. It was an invention of the advertising industry as a billboard for their logos, purely cosmetic.
Well, if planes don't actually fly, then what does the aerodynamics engineer do?
The primary role of the AE is to dupe the travelling public.
How?
Well, with a series of distractions. Stewardesses, food, movies, poor music, headsets that don't work. This is all designed to stop them from putting two and two together.
Well, if what you're saying is true, then surely the entire aeronautics industry is a farce.
Yep.
I believe that Mitlov's theory can be historically proven. You only have to look at any period in aviation history to see that we've been conned.
Author and historian George Dodd is in total agreement with Mitlov. His book, Flying, The Great Hoax, challenges many of our perceptions about flying. For instance, the rapid development of flight that took place during the 2 world wars.
Well, it's a joke, really. To cover up the fact that more planes were taking off than had landed, both sides claimed to be shooting down the enemy, when in fact the planes were just falling out of the sky.
Fighter 1 to Fighter 2, Jerry at 3 o'clock.
No, couldn't possibly, Fighter 1. Busy then, flying.
No, no, behind you, behind you.
Oh, yes, that'll be him firing now. Yes, I've got him in my sights.
Got him in your tight.
No, sights, Fighter 1, sights.
Good shot, Mohammed.
I didn't shoot him, Miss Bin Ali. He's just falling out of the sky.
Hey, so am I.
Oh, wow. Oh, me too. I love you, Squatty.
Well, it's now clear through our research that most of the major air battles of history were in fact hoaxes.
So the planes didn't actually fight?
Well, how could they? They were falling. And even carrying a small amount of ammunition would have meant that they couldn't have taken off at all.
Did all governments do this?
Oh, indeed, all governments, including our own.
Really?
But it was actually the Japanese government that was most skillful at this because they had to cover up an alarmingly high incidence of planes just falling out of the sky. So they created the myth of the kamikaze.
Very, very disturbing stuff. More of the Icarus legacy later on, but ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome our first guest for tonight. He's probably quite familiar to you, formerly of This Day Tonight and towards 2000 before he took the filthy bucks and went to Channel 7 like all the good ones do. I'm sorry, will you please welcome, from beyond 2000, Jeff Watson. Sorry, Jeff, we're all still a bit upset about, you know, the defection, as we call it. Please sit down.
Thank you very much. It's my wing, is it? Yes. Yes. Some very heavy flak over our tarmac tonight, Andrew.
Yes, my head's giving me a bit of jip. What? Jeff, you're a renowned plane head. I mean, you've been in about everything that can fly, haven't you?
Yes, I keep on finding this person who leaves diced carrots in oxygen masks in various types of military aircraft. That's the cardinal sin. When we were still with the ABC, I got in the F-18. I was the first Aussie journalist.
Rub it in.
Yes. No, we made a lot of those flying trips with the F-18, with the ABC. But I went to America and they strapped me into sort of 18 tons of screaming aluminum. And to fly in the F-18, they took samples of bodily fluids I didn't actually know I possessed. You know, I had my teeth drilled, my hearing checked, my eyesight and everything. And they fired me up in this ejection seat. I suffered a sort of premature ejection, you know, before they'd actually let me go in the aircraft. And we went off with the pilot's name was Chuck, which is more significant as the story unfolds.
Chuck Flint Blaster,
yes,
was that his name?
One of the amazing things about the F-18, Andrew, it's quite extraordinary. They have a computer-generated female voice, which sounds like Doris Day in the headset. It has a limited vocabulary, you see. So you're flying along, and this voice says, altitude, altitude. I said, well, who's that? Who's that? Chuck. And he said, oh, that's bitching Betty, you know. And I said, well, why do you have a woman's voice telling you what you're doing wrong with the plane? And he said, oh, well, Americans always listen to what their wives say. So I said, what about the Australian version of the aircraft? You know, will you have sort of Edna Everage saying, pull up, possums, you're flying too low. You know? We spent an awful lot of American taxpayers' money, which was extremely gratifying. We dropped bombs and fired the gun, you know.
Yes.
We're hurtling. We're sort of, you know, the famous sort of World War II saying, you know, there I was, upside down, flat on my back, and the only thing I could read on the clock was the maker's name. We're hurtling towards the Mojave Desert. And the guy's talking to me and they force oxygen into it at a tremendous rate, you see. And he said, you're okay, Mr. Watson? I said, yes, really neat, Chuck. And he said, you know, this is real flying. It's kind of like, it's like sex. I said, not as I last recall it. And we you know, it's a remarkable plane. Of course, I mean, why do they have these things? It's to kill people, really. I mean, I hope we never have to use it.
Yes, but so eloquently.
It's so eloquently, yes.
It's a beautiful way of death.
Good. The thing about flying, I mean, it's you know, I mean, it's just I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And what did I do? End up working for the ABC.
Well, it's much the same thing, just the battles are a bit more sort of confined to a desk.
That's right, yes. But I've really just, that show has enabled me to get in lots of things that I probably wouldn't if I'd been a service pilot.
Yeah, well, what are some of the other extraordinary things you've flown in?
But, you know, I think one of the best value-for-money trips for people who don't even particularly like flying, but the fellow in the Red Baron who flies over Sydney every Saturday in that Tiger Moth, which I think is one of the best tourist trips in Australia, when you fly down George Street at 70 miles an hour, fly around Centre Point. I reckon that's a lot of fun for somebody who wants to get into flying or an introduction to flying. It's real flying. As you said on the programme already, I mean, flying on airliners is terribly boring. I do have, actually, we've flown so much for this show, and, you know, we travel such an awful lot. To relieve the tension, I can suggest a couple of wizard wheezes. If you're really bored, when the host is doing the oxygen masks and routine and the, you know, life belt, get half a dozen of you and take the sick bag from the seat in front, and with a grease pencil, write a number from 1 to 6, or 1 to 10, like that, you see. And then when she's finished, one of you stands up. It's very effective on a jumbo, and you say, gentlemen, can I have your scores, please? Works like a charm. That whiles away the hours.
Well, you could do the old Barry Humphries trick of getting some, you know, fruit salad and putting it in the sick bag and then start eating it.
A couple of little digressions. When we used to do the radio programme with the ABC Traveller's Tales, we had the most extraordinary story from this woman who was terrified of flying. So she doped herself up to the eyeball. She got on the plane at Heathrow, I don't know, to go somewhere, and took a sleeping pill. Well, she was a smoker, and she had a very sort of coiffured sort of hairstyle with a lot of lacquer on it. And she just went out like a light, like this, you see, with her head in the cigarette. 5 minutes later, the sort of smell of burning, and the hostess came and put her out with a fire extinguisher.
She's doing Pepsi commercials today, right?
Apparently, another story that we heard, and this one I don't know, but the BBC in England was sending a crew to South Africa. So, again, the director said to all these guys, look, you've not been on a long 12-hour flight before. You know, take one of these, you'll be okay. And before you know it, you'll wake up in Johannesburg. So all the crew, the cameraman, they all take a sleeping pill, and zonk, they're out before the plane's left the ground. Unfortunately, the plane turned back an hour out and went back to Heathrow, where they could not wake them up. So they put all these guys in wheelchairs, took them to a hotel, and put them to bed. The next morning, sure enough, you know, the guy walks to the window and opens the curtain and says, Johannesburg! It's Heathrow!
That's fabulous. Yes. It doesn't concern you, the question of air safety, or as regards you personally?
I think about it all the while. I think the more you fly, the odds must go up and up of something happening. I mean, I'm gratified that Qantas haven't lost a passenger ever since they've had jets, you know. It is a very safe airline, and the other two airlines in Australia are very safe. We have an enviable air safety record in Australia. But I do worry about some airlines that I have no intention of mentioning, like Aeroflot. And that we've been on. I mean, Aeroflot I went on and...
Which you're not mentioning.
No, that's right, I'm not mentioning. And, sorry, Gorbachev. And I got on, there's no seatbelt in this seat. Oh, I got in the next seat, there's no seatbelt in that one either. And the next one had a seatbelt that was knotted, but this side was broken. And the hostess walked up and down, there were newspapers stacked in the aisle. This was going to Minsk. And I think we were going to Minsk, we were coming from Minsk. We had a glass of hot water, and we were offered some potatoes on a six-hour flight. And I said, wonder where the hostess is, and she disappeared behind the curtains. I'm always intrigued when they go behind the curtains. I went in there, it's a very rather overweight Russian woman. She was sitting in the sink on the aircraft, sort of with her bum stuck in the sink, you know.
I hate to think what she was doing.
I know.
What about the future of flying? Do you see exciting developments?
They are proposing to set up a spaceport in Australia by 1992.
Is that serious?
Yeah, oh yes, and it's not like the water into petrol thing that Joe was into. They are actually going to... Australia is very, very well placed for launching satellites, particularly in northern Australia, which is close to the equator, you see. The British have a thing called HOTOL, which is a space plane which could fly from the UK to Australia in 45 minutes, which 20 years ago you would have said, well... 30 years ago, certainly, I wouldn't have imagined I'd be crossing the Atlantic in 3 hours.
Now, I imagine the English cricket team aren't keen to get here any quicker than they have.
Point taken.
And you're going to obviously remain a romantic and a planehead.
I'm afraid so.
Yes, well, Jeff Watson, I wish you well. You're a fool, you're a mad fool, but I wish you well. Thank you very much.
Andrew, great pleasure.
And now, we'll go back to part 2 of our very important award-winning documentary, The Icarus Legacy.